Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book, the show comparison for the Expanse Season 4, Episode 6, Displacement. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare the Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well I feel those adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to Season 4, Episode 6. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't read the books, not to worry, there will be no future spoilers beyond the events of Season 4. So our episode begins where the last one took off with the Belters and the RCE team screaming at each other and Holden not able to calm them down when Naomi and Alex calls Holden to tell them about the huge explosion on the other side of the planet, which means there's a shockwave with torrential winds and a huge tsunami headed their way. They say he only has 20 hours until the tsunami wipes out the settlement, clear off the planet. So Holden goes to the screaming crowds and tries and fails to get their attention. So Amos fires his rifle in the air, and that manages to quiet everyone down. Then he announces that the Cap has something important to say. Holden says they're all in danger, then transfers the data of the explosion to everyone's hand terminals. So in the books, we never really got a scene with the two factions screaming at each other like this, and as I mentioned in previous videos, at this stage in the novels, Naomi was being held prisoner on the Edward Israel. So what happened in the novels was that Alex called Holden with an emergency message, and Holden had assumed that something happened to Naomi, but Alex instead told them about the massive explosion on the other side of the planet, and that the apocalypse was headed their way. However, in the novels, Alex explained that Holden was far enough inland to avoid the tsunami, but there would be torrential storms that the settlement absolutely could not stand. So later, Holden went to Murtry and Carol Chiwiwi alone in a conference with the information. So I understand why the show made these changes, as it made the story much more exciting, particularly when the tsunami hit. So I'm going to give this a +1. So Carol Chiwiwi confirms the data with the Barbara McCullough's captain, who confirms he witnessed it himself and that it's not a hoax. Carol then yells at Holden, placing the blame on him, saying that this is all his fault. He tells her that this isn't helping right now, that they need to focus on evacuating the planet. Chiwiwi says that she'll agree to leave if Holden will go to Avasarala and support their claim to be on the planet. Holden tells her that he doesn't speak for Avasarala or the UN, but he'll do everything he can to help their cause. So she does agree to leave and begins to gather up all the other Belters. Meanwhile, from the look on Murtry's face, you can tell he's not at all happy about this agreement. So in the novels, Murtry was the one who had to double-check Holden's findings before he believed him. Carol Chiwiwi seemed to take him at his word, and she also didn't need to be convinced to evacuate the planet. However, at this stage, they weren't talking about evacuation, as apparently there wasn't enough time to evacuate, so the plan from the start was to hide in the alien structure. Both versions seemed to work, but for some reason I wasn't a fan of everyone knowing about Holden's connection to Miller and what was happening on the planet. I think I preferred the books version where everyone was ignorant of this, so I'm going to give this a -1. So next we see Jacob in his house preparing to evacuate when he gets a call from the Barbara McCullough captain, who tells him that while they were prepping the shuttle they found something that belongs to him, and then his daughter Felsia appears on screen. Jacob is very relieved to see that she's okay, and she apologizes for worrying him. When he asks what she's doing there, she says that she's returning to the Sol system so that she could go to college. When she asks about if her mother is angry at her, Jacob gets serious and has to explain what happened to Lucia and how she was involved in destroying the heavy shuttle. So in the novels, Felicia ran away to the Barbacola with her mother's permission. They tried to keep it from her father Basia, but he found out just in time to see her off and give her his permission to leave and say their goodbyes. So in the novels, Felicia wasn't a stowaway, but a known passenger. This, of course, works fine for the show, although I think it was kind of cheap and unnecessary to have Jacob and Lucia think that Mercury killed her for so long, when really she just ran away, so I'm going to give this a -1. So then we go to the Rosinante, where Alex brings Lucia the good news that her daughter is okay and on the Barbacola, so he opens up a channel so that she can talk to her daughter, and as soon as she does, she asks if she's okay, but Felicia interrupts her, telling her that her father told her about what she did, and she's apparently very angry at her, and she calls her a hypocrite, and how she also ran away from home, but Felicia says that at least she didn't kill anyone on her way out, and then hangs up, which of course really upsets Lucia. So in the novels, as I mentioned in previous videos, it was Felicia's father Basia who helped plant the bombs and had to run away to the Rosinante, but she wasn't angry with him in the novels. In fact, because officially he was a prisoner on the Rosinante, she was at first angry with Holden and the Rosinante crew, but he had to explain to her that they actually saved him and they were treating him well. Although the bigger concern was Basia and Lucia's son, who was older in the novels, who went to Holden with a gun with the intention of doing harm, but Elvie spotted him and talked him down, and Holden let him talk to Basia on the Rosinante, where Basia explained that Holden saved him. Both situations work fine for their respective mediums, but I gotta be honest, I found the book's version much more interesting, so I'm going to give this a -2. We then see the fusion drive failing to work and the power going out on the Rosinante and on the Edward Israel. Alex goes to the command center to check on what's going on, and Naomi confirms that the drive just isn't working when it should be, that the laws of physics don't seem to be working right now, and Alex concludes that the protomolecule is at it again. So in the novels, this also happened, but a bit out of order, as it happens after everyone on the planet had retreated into the alien structure and their settlement had already been destroyed by the storms, as they were still planning on evacuating after that, but that's when the ships went dead. Although both ways work for the respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. So next we see Holden on Illis, where the earthquake occurs but with no real damage. He then gets a call from Alex and Naomi on the Rosinante, and he assures him that the earthquake was no big deal. However, Alex has worse news, as he reports that the laws of physics just stopped working, as none of the ships in orbit can use their fusion drives, which puts the Rossi coming down to pick everyone up off the table. Naomi suggests that the protomolecule turned off all fusion to stop another explosion like the one that occurred on the other side of the planet from happening again. Holden then suggests that they use the light shuttles on the Edward Israel and the Barbacola to pick everyone up. Alex warns that that will take more time, so it will be tight, but Holden assures them that they can make it. However, Naomi warns that that's only part of the problem. The other concern is that the Barbacola is not rated for atmosphere and their orbit will decay, but Holden tells her one problem at a time. However, Lucia comes in and heard that last part of the conversation and asks Naomi what she means by not rated for atmosphere. Naomi and Alex explain to her that the Barbacola is in low orbit, and with fusion drive not working, the orbit will decay and eventually it will fall out of the sky. And when she starts to freak out, Alex assures her that if they don't fix the problem soon, all 3 ships will fall out of the sky. So in the novels, again, events happen in a different order, as this all happened after the settlement is destroyed and they're already hiding in the alien artifact. Also, the plan all along was to use the light shuttles to ferry people up, and the shuttle was destroyed right before they lost their fusion drive rather than after. Also, Naomi's comment about shutting down the fusion to prevent another disaster was not the conclusion they came to in the novels. There, they saw it more as a defensive measure, kind of similar to how the slow zone trapped all the ships going too fast in Book 3. Also in the novels, the Rosinante was actually not in any danger of falling out of orbit, but the Edward Israel and the Barbacola were. In fact, the Rosinante did have enough reserve power to land on the planet, they just couldn't take off again. So Holden ordered Alex not to do that, especially since Naomi was still being held prisoner on the Edward Israel. However, Bozia's reaction to the news of the Barbacola's impending doom was about the same as Lucia's reaction was in the show, except maybe more severe, but Alex reassured him that they were going to get his daughter back before the Barbacola fell out of the sky, no matter what. Now, the order of events being changed in the show makes sense as it's designed to create more tension and suspense, and it just works better for the show's narrative. Also, I prefer that Naomi thinks that it was the planet trying to prevent another disaster, rather than it being a defensive measure. That actually makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to give this a +2. So Holden then meets with Mercury to come up with a new plan to evacuate the planet, so he suggests using the light shuttle on the Edward Israel. Mercury agrees but says he's not evacuating the Belters, that they're welcome to use the heavy shuttle if they can put it back together. Holden gets upset and tells them that they're all in this together, but Mercury says that Holden had made himself partisan by promising to help the Belters' cause. Holden then takes a menacing step angrily towards Mercury, ready to shout at him, but Mercury adds that he's willing to take the Belters if they agree to dump all of the illegally mined lithium on the Barbacola. Holden tries to argue it doesn't make a difference because the ship is going down anyway, but Mercury tells him not to underestimate himself, that they may yet still be able to stop that from happening. So Holden agrees to talk to them about it. So in the novels, the dispute wasn't so much about using the shuttles to evacuate everyone, as the Barb had its own shuttles anyway, and the dispute was more about where to put all the settlers once evacuated, as there wasn't enough room on the Barb or the Rossi, meaning some Belters would have to be evacuated to the Edward Israel. And the way Holden phrased it to Mercury was as an order that he gave him no choice. In fact, Holden and Amos were at the ready, and they were prepared to kill Mercury if he refused to go along with this. At first, Mercury suggested that if the Barb dumped its illegally mined lithium, then all the Belters would fit, but Holden argued even if they did, the Barb wasn't equipped to take on that many passengers. So Mercury did agree to this, but at this stage he was taking the same attitude that Mercury in the show had taken earlier, whereas he saw it as an excuse to get the Belters off the planet, especially since at this stage in the novels the Belter settlement had already been destroyed, which meant once the Belters left they would have no claim to the planet whatsoever. So this accomplishes pretty much the same thing that was done in the novels, but adjusted for the changes, so I'm going to give this a 0. So the light shuttle departs the Edward Israel and attempts to make its descent to the planet's surface, but mysteriously just disintegrates in the atmosphere. As everyone on the planet looks up in horror, they notice Illus's moon starting to glow red. Mercury calls the Israel to ask what's going on, and the officer there just reports that the shuttle is gone. When Mercury asks about the moon, they report that the moon is melting. So Mercury asks what's Plan C, and Way responds that they make the town into a shelter that can withstand 200-kilometer winds and flooding. Amos remarks that Plan C sounds like everyone dies. Holden then says that they'll go to the alien ruins and hide inside. Chiwiwi argues that there's no way inside, but Holden answers that he's been inside, that Miller had opened a door for him, and that they can blow it open with explosives, and everyone runs to make that happen. So in the novels, as I already explained, there was no tsunami, so the incident with the shuttle exploding occurred after they were already hiding inside the alien ruins. Further, the shuttle was shot down by planet defenses rather than just disintegrating in the atmosphere. Also, the moon had already started melting a while ago, before the explosions on the island occurred. Also in the novels, the alien ruins did have an opening, and the Belters had already been inside, as that's where the terrorists were hiding their explosives, so it wasn't an issue to get inside. Now, I understand why they changed the order of events to allow for the tsunami. Also, they had to change the alien structure to not having an opening so it could protect them against the tsunami, all of which made for more intense storytelling. Plus, the show is going more with the planet protecting itself from another meltdown rather than the planet's defensive, which I like. So I'm going to give this a +1. So our team go to investigate the alien structure, including Holden, Amos, Murtry, and Way. They discover that the door is left cracked open, despite the fact that Holden said that it had been closed behind him. Holden speculates that Miller might have opened it for them, but Amos offers that perhaps the doors aren't as sturdy as they thought and the earthquake knocked them loose. Way notes that if that's the case, they're all screwed. Amos points out that if they can get in, they can seal the hole behind them, but he points to openings towards the top of the structure and points out that there's no way that they can seal those. But Holden just says just focusing on getting in, and they go to get the mining charges. So in the novels, as I explained earlier, the alien structure wasn't closed, it was open-ended, so they had no problem getting in, but I understand why the show had to have openings towards the top of the structure so it could allow for the death slugs to get in later on, as in the novels the death slugs had no problem getting in because the alien structure was wide open. So this all adds to the tension, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we see them blow open the doors to the alien structure and they inspect the hole that they created, which does seem to be big enough for their purposes. Wayne notes that the material is not hot, meaning it's tough. Murtry says that's good because it needs to be. They throw in a rope down the hole and Amos volunteers to climb down. Way asks him how he knows it's safe and Amos answers that he doesn't. So Way gives him a big kiss just in case. Amos climbs down and he is fine, so he calls for them to start sending people down, so the Belters start climbing down the rope to the bottom. Now in the novels, not only did they not need to blow the door open, but also they didn't need to climb down anything as the area inside the structure was ground level. Also, Way never kissed Amos in public like this. In fact, the relationship was more implied. Earlier in the show, Murtry asked Way if she had to go against her boyfriend, if that would be a problem, whereas in the novels, there's nothing to indicate that Murtry knew that she was having a relationship with Amos. Holden only noticed because later in the meeting with Murtry, he saw Amos and Way smiling at each other as if they're sharing an inside joke, and that's really the only big indication in the novels that they were sleeping together. But as I've been on record on saying before, I like that the show was more open about Amos and Way's relationship and how they explored it more. I think it adds a lot to the show, so I'm going to give this a +2. So we see Holden arrive back at the settlement and he gets word from the Rossi that the shockwave is coming, so he yells at everyone to get inside and hunker down as there's not enough time to get back to the ruins before the shockwave arrives. He sees movement inside the laboratory and finds Elvie there gathering equipment. He asks her what the hell she's doing and she insists the equipment that she's gathering will be vital, but then Holden sees the giant shockwave approaching and only has time to say holy shit before it hits the structure, breaking all the windows, throwing all the stuff, including Holden and Elvie, to the ground. But they come out relatively unscathed, but Holden goes outside to find not everyone was so lucky as he sees a few dead bodies. He then hears a young child calling for help and he finds a young girl whose parents were apparently killed in the shockwave, so he grabs her hand and helps take her to safety. So I don't recall there being a shockwave in the novels. If there was, it certainly wasn't as eventful. But there was a scene where Elvie was gathering equipment and Holden told her to leave it behind, but she had to explain that it could create drinking water. Also in the novels, once they were at the alien structure, Carol Chiwewe did a head count and found that they were missing a family that lived on the edge of town, and Amos insisted on going out to look for them to the point where he was almost threatening Holden because he refused to let a little girl die. But the Rossi reported that the storms were about to hit, so he couldn't go. He went looking for them after the storm subsided, but couldn't find them, so they were presumed dead. I think the story with Emma's trying to find missing children made more sense, as it fit with his character to be protective of children. Also, the scene in the show with Holden finding the lone survivor wasn't followed up on again in any way, so it felt a little bit more pointless, so I'm going to give this a -2. Okay, so for this episode, I decided to cover all the Bobby Draper stuff at once, since if I covered each scene separately, I'd just keep repeating the same thing that nothing remotely close to this happened in novels over and over again. So these scenes, we see Bobby work as a henchwoman for S.I. As she protects him from attacks. We see her discussing business in a bar with S.I. and Lily, but her and Lily still don't get along. They meet with a former Martian Marine who is a dick to Bobby when she's just trying to be polite, as they plan to rob a decommissioned terraforming tower. Bobby meets up with her fling, Thomas, who notes how much more wealthy she seems to be. Later, her, S.I., Lily, and their new associate Beltram go to rob the tower, but his codes fail to work, so S.I. orders that they abort, but Draper comes up with another plan and climbs the tower outside in a suit with limited air and opens it from the outside. However, she's caught by a guard who locks her out, and she collapses from lack of oxygen. But S.I. and the others manage to get inside, and they knock out the guard, and they are able to save her in time, and their big score is successful. So, as if I need to say it, nothing remotely close to this happened in the novels. The Bobby Draper storyline this season so far was very loosely based off a short story called The Gods of Risk, but her storyline has now completely surpassed that and has nothing to do with it, because that short story was mostly about her nephew getting caught up with some shady people. Draper was never involved in any criminal activity to sell unused Martian equipment. This was all an invention of the show that ties loosely to the events of Book 5, which I won't get to at all in this video. Suffice to say, I found this life of crime storyline with Draper and S.I. much more interesting than anything in the Gods of Risk, so I'm going to give this a +3. So back on Ellis, everyone's hiding inside the alien structure, ready for shelter, except Amos and a few others who are putting the finishing touches on a pulley system that allows them to cover up the hole with a piece of bulkhead. But then they all climb inside as well. Holden stays on the ledge by the opening as Amos, Mercury, and the others try to pull on the pulley system to close the hole. But it isn't working, so Holden climbs outside of the hole and tries to help lift the bulkhead from the outside. Meanwhile, the tsunami is fastly approaching them. It still isn't working, so Holden grabs a crowbar to lift the bulkhead, and they manage to lift it up just in time as the tsunami starts to hit, and Holden has to jump inside to get inside before the hole closes. Some water does get in, but they manage to close the hole as the tsunami crashes against the structure. So as I explained earlier, nothing like this happened in novels, as there was no tsunami, there was no hole to the alien structure, so all of this as an invention of the show, but it's also way more dramatic than the books were, where in the books it was just a simple matter of walking into the alien structure and hiding from the winds. This portrays the same sense of peril, but in a much more urgent fashion, which ramped up the excitement levels in a big way, so I'm going to give this a +4. So my final adaptation score for Displacement is a +8. Overall, this episode is fairly on par with the novels, doing just as good as the job, but adjusting for the changes that the show has made. However, the slight difference does come in with the ending with the tsunami, which was much more exciting than how the books handled it, which puts it slightly above the books. So that's it for my book-to-show comparison for The Expanse Season 4, Episode 6. I'll be back in a week to cover Episode 7, so be sure to check that out. Also, be sure to check out my channel for many more Expanse videos, as well as videos on other shows like Picard, Better Call Saul, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.